Mark, we're letting you go. Effective today. That sentence, spoken without pause or remorse, shattered 17 years of loyalty in less than 5 seconds. Mark Harrington, 57, stood still as the words hung in the air like static. Across the polished desk sat Cliff Morton, the new CEO of Sierra Tech Systems in Tucson, Arizona. A man young enough to be Mark's son, but smug enough to think experience was obsolete. Next to him sat Lauren from HR, eyes glazed, hands folded neatly like this was just another Tuesday. Mark didn't argue. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded once, not out of acceptance, but dignity. Then he turned and walked out of the office where he'd built his life. For nearly 2 decades, Mark had been Sierra Tech's IT backbone, from the days of noisy dial-up to complex cloud migrations. He'd written most of the proprietary code that still powered their internal platforms. He was there when they landed their first major defense contract. He worked weekends, missed Thanksgivings, pulled systems back from the brink of collapse during a Christmas Eve data breach no one else remembered. And now, he was dismissed like a forgotten extension cord. As he packed up his office, a corner cubicle filled with photos of his wife Lena, now retired, and his daughter Rachel, who just had her first baby, the silence was thunderous. Young employees he'd mentored looked away in discomfort. A few offered weak smiles. One quietly whispered, "I'm sorry," as he passed. But the real twist wasn't in the firing itself. It was in how effortlessly it was executed. No performance review, no warning, no handshake. Just a clean break orchestrated with surgical coldness. A man who had once been essential was now considered expendable. Mark walked out of the Sierra Tech building not with rage, but with a deep ache. Not for the job, but for what it symbolized. A society that no longer values wisdom earned over time. His loyalty was repaid not with respect, but with redundancy. How does a man reconcile a lifetime of dedication with a single moment of erasure? For older viewers, especially those nearing or past retirement, this isn't just Mark's story. It's a mirror. Have your years of service been built on solid ground, or on sand that washes away the moment you're deemed less efficient? What happens when your identity is tied to your work, and then the work disappears? Let that question linger as we follow what Mark does next. The desert heat pressed against Mark's windshield as he sat in the driveway of his modest suburban home. The same house where he'd tucked Rachel into bed after school plays and walked Lena through her first online banking tutorial. For 17 years, Sierra Tech had been his second home. But now that home had locked him out, politely but permanently. Inside, Lena looked up from the kitchen as the front door opened. She didn't ask anything right away, didn't need to. The slump in Mark's shoulders said enough. "Want coffee?" she asked softly. He nodded. They sat in silence, steam rising between them. Outside, wind chimes rang gently against the porch railing, a soft contrast to the quiet storm building inside Mark. The kind of storm that wasn't loud, just cold, measured, and deeply unsettling. That night, as Lena went to bed, Mark stayed in his home office and booted up his personal laptop. Not for emails, not for job searches, just instinct. Years of safeguarding Sierra Tech's systems had trained him to spot patterns, discrepancies, digital missteps. And something had been off lately. About 3 months prior, Mark had noticed subtle shifts, project updates he wasn't copied on, access permissions that were quietly altered, certain files suddenly locked behind additional credentials. At the time, he chalked it up to corporate politics, the natural attrition of aging in tech. But now, he opened a backup log, one he had created himself for Sierra Tech years ago as part of a data redundancy protocol. Mark had always believed in preparation. Unlike most, he never trusted a single point of failure, not in systems and not in people. One particular anomaly caught his eye. A vendor, Horizon West Analytics, had been receiving monthly payments through the accounting system. At first glance, everything appeared routine. Invoice numbers, approval codes, timestamps. But Mark didn't recognize the vendor. It wasn't one he had ever worked with, and his mental index of Sierra Tech's third-party providers was encyclopedic. He cross-referenced the payments against internal procurement logs. Then he searched the company database for Horizon West. Nothing. No contracts, no emails, no onboarding documentation. That's when the alarm bells truly rang. He plugged in a second flash drive, an encrypted copy of his old compliance tracker. Years ago, he'd designed a security dashboard to log access changes across departments. The legal team had forgotten about it, but Mark hadn't. He'd kept it alive, updated, out of habit more than instruction. The data told a story. 18 months ago, Sierra Tech's chief financial officer, Daryl Stanton, had requested expanded access to the enterprise finance platform, specifically to override vendor vetting protocols. That was when the first Horizon West payments had started. Mark's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't petty. This was fraud. Quiet, methodical, institutional fraud. And he had the breadcrumbs to prove it. Mark leaned back in his chair, heart beating slow but deliberate. Sierra Tech hadn't just discarded him. They'd removed the one person most likely to see what others missed. Because unlike the consultants, the executives, the suits that came and went, Mark hadn't just worked in the system. He was the system. And now, for the first time in 17 years, he was looking at it from the outside, with nothing left to lose. The next morning, the Arizona sun filtered through the blinds of Mark's home office as he sipped black coffee from a chipped mug Rachel had painted in 5th grade. He hadn't slept much. Not from stress, but clarity. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Mark felt awake. He wasn't going to confront anyone. Not yet. That was the mistake most people made when they stumbled onto wrongdoing. They got loud. Mark knew better. Loud got you dismissed. Quiet got you the truth. So, he went to work, not as an employee, but as an investigator. He started with Horizon West Analytics. It had no website, no staff listing, just a business registration tied to a P.O. box in Flagstaff. That in itself wasn't illegal. Small vendors used mail centers all the time. But it was a red flag. He kept digging. A Hoy's lookup on the company's domain revealed it had been registered 19 months ago, barely a month before the first payment. The listed registrant? A Travis Stanton. Mark's eyes narrowed. Stanton. Same last name as the CFO, Daryl Stanton. He opened Facebook and ran a quick search. It didn't take long. Travis was Daryl's cousin. There were birthday photos, backyard barbecues, even a tagged fishing trip where they posed beside a lake with identical sunglasses and smug smiles. This wasn't a vendor. It was a laundering shell. The invoices Horizon West had submitted were for consulting and data optimization services. Vague, safe. Mark compared them to work Sierra Tech had actually contracted out. Every line item Horizon listed was a duplicate of a legitimate service from elsewhere, just billed again at a 15 to 25% markup. He opened a spreadsheet, built a timeline, and began logging payments. Over the next 2 days, Mark pieced together a comprehensive picture. The fraud had started small, $4,000 here, $6,500 there. But as no one noticed, or no one wanted to notice, the amounts grew bolder. By month 14, Horizon West was receiving over $40,000 monthly for infrastructure insight reviews. Mark had seen those reviews. He'd written most of them himself years ago. By Sunday evening, he'd traced just under $1.6 million in total payments. And he wasn't done. The real revelation came when he found references to another entity, Delta North Consulting, also buried in quarterly vendor reports. This one was linked to an Eli Kramer. The name rang a bell. Eli had been introduced 6 months ago as a high-priced external consultant brought in to modernize operations. But something hadn't sat right with Mark back then. Kramer didn't understand the system infrastructure. He asked basic questions. He deflected technical issues back to internal staff and spent most of his time in closed-door meetings with Daryl Stanton and Cliff Morton. Mark had dismissed it at the time as corporate theater. Now it looked more like coordinated cover. He ran a background check. Delta North had only ever had one client, Sierra Tech. Its registered address? The same building that housed Horizon West's P.O. box. Mark sat back, staring at the screen. This was bigger than fraud. This was a triangle: executive, consultant, and shell companies, built to bleed the company dry while parading around in buzzwords and fake progress. And they needed Mark gone, not because he was in the way, but because he was the only one who knew how to look. The pieces all made sense now. His admin rights being reduced, meetings that didn't include him, emails left off threads. It hadn't been incompetence or forgetfulness. It had been erasure, intentional, strategic. He looked down at the flash drive he kept in a lockbox under his desk. It contained legacy access logs, change histories, archived backups, and an offline admin console Mark had built back when Sierra Tech was barely 2 stories tall. None of it had been deleted. No one else knew it existed. They had underestimated him. Most systems fail because someone overlooks a dependency. Someone believes an old script isn't running anymore, or that a retired employee didn't leave behind any hooks. But Mark had always believed in redundancy, in off-site recovery, in tracking every change, every login, every administrative request. He had built Sierra Tech's nervous system. And now, for the first time in his life, he had the opportunity to prove what he always quietly knew. He was the only one who could take it apart. He opened a blank document and began drafting. Not an email, not a threat. A plan. Monday morning arrived like a drum roll. Mark sat in his car across the street from Sierra Tech's glass-paneled headquarters, the same building he'd been escorted out of less than a week ago. It felt surreal, watching employees trickle in, coffee in hand, eyes on phones, unaware they were walking into a house with a cracked foundation. In the passenger seat, his personal laptop was open, logged into a private email server he had built years ago for secure testing, an internal spoof domain that mimicked Sierra Tech's systems but wasn't traceable by the main network. He'd originally created it to simulate phishing attacks during cybersecurity drills. Now, it served a far more personal purpose. At precisely 9 a.m., he sent a single message. Subject: urgent. Financial irregularities concerning Horizon West and Delta North. The recipient: Cliff Morton, CEO. CC'd: Daryl Stanton and a generic compliance inbox that Mark knew Cliff rarely checked. The email wasn't aggressive. It was careful, laced with enough detail to raise alarms but not trigger immediate retaliation. He didn't reveal the family connection, not yet. He simply pointed out unexplained vendor payments, inconsistencies in approval timestamps, and requested an internal audit of consulting arrangements for the past 24 months. Then he waited. By 9:26 a.m., his phone buzzed. Cliff Morton. Mark let it ring. A voicemail followed. Mark, I saw your email. I think you're confused about some of these charges. We should talk immediately. Please, call me back. He didn't. Instead, Mark drove to a nearby public library, logged into a guest Wi-Fi account, and checked his backup cloud storage. Everything was there: spreadsheets, invoice scans, business registrations, even a folder of screenshots from social media linking Daryl to Travis and Eli. It was all time-stamped, organized, and ready to go. At 10:15 a.m., a second email arrived. This one from Sierra Tech's HR Director, Lauren. Mr. Harrington, we are aware of a communication you sent to senior leadership. Per your separation agreement, we must remind you of your confidentiality obligations. Any further unauthorized contact will result in legal action. Mark smiled faintly. He had never signed any separation agreement. The company had been so eager to make him vanish, they hadn't even completed the formal paperwork. Another oversight. Another entry in his log. By noon, he received a third message. This one, more desperate. It was from Eli Kramer. Mark, can we talk? I think there's been some misunderstanding. I can meet anywhere, anytime. That sealed it. They were rattled. Mark knew he couldn't go public yet. If he released everything now, they'd spin it as the angry ramblings of a disgruntled ex-employee. He needed a witness, someone inside the company with authority, someone the board still trusted. He thought of one name: Margot Lindell, Sierra Tech's longest-serving board member and former general counsel. Years ago, Mark had worked with her on an internal security overhaul after a client data leak. She had grilled him relentlessly during that project, but she respected the truth. She respected thoroughness. At 1 p.m., Mark emailed Margot directly from a secure Proton mail address. The message was brief. I have documentation related to significant financial misconduct involving Sierra Tech executives. This is not a whistleblower stunt. This is a structured fraud operation. I do not seek reinstatement or revenge. I seek accountability. I am willing to meet under your conditions. He attached no files. Not yet. By 2:45, her reply came. Meet me at the Desert Ridge parking garage. Level 3, 6 p.m. Come alone. Leave nothing traceable. And if this is real, be prepared for fallout. Mark stared at the screen for a moment. This was the turning point. That night, as the Tucson air cooled and the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark stood beside his car under the low concrete ceiling of the parking garage. At 6:02 p.m., a black sedan pulled up. Margot stepped out, dressed in slacks and a windbreaker, holding a small notebook. Without a word, Mark handed her a sealed manila envelope and a USB drive. 3 vendors, falsified invoices, family connections, over $4.7 million in siphoned funds, he said quietly, backed by access logs and internal approvals. If you validate just 30% of this, the board has grounds for immediate intervention. Margot opened the envelope and skimmed the executive summary. Why now? She asked. Because I was the only one watching, Mark replied. And they thought firing me would turn off the lights. She closed the folder slowly. I'll call for a closed board session by Thursday, she said. Until then, keep your head down. Mark nodded once. As she drove away, he stood under the parking structure lights, heart steady, the cold satisfaction of strategy taking root. This wasn't just a counterattack, it was a system restore. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. At 8 a.m. sharp, a closed-door board session was convened at Sierra Tech's executive floor. No press, no assistants. Just 10 board members, 1 conference table, and a digital folder marked Confidential, Financial Review, Harrington Materials. Margot Lindell presented first. She spoke slowly, methodically, as she walked the board through the fraud structure. Invoices, shell companies, family connections, access logs, and the quiet erasure of the one man who could have stopped it earlier. Mark Harrington. By 8:43 a.m., silence fell over the room like a curtain. Then came the knock. 2 uniformed officers from the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions entered the lobby, escorted by Sierra Tech's general counsel. They had warrants in hand. Within minutes, Darrell Stanton, the CFO, was led out of his office without resistance. His tie was half loosened, face pale. At the same time, security footage later revealed, Cliff Morton attempted to delete several directories from his corporate laptop. He was locked out of the system within 12 seconds. It had been instructed by Margot herself. Full lockdown protocols, effective 8:45 a.m. By 9:15, both Cliff and Eli Kramer were being held in separate conference rooms for questioning. And Mark? Mark wasn't in the building. He was seated 2 blocks away at a cafe, sipping his second espresso and reading a tattered copy of A Man for All Seasons. His phone buzzed with messages from a dozen unknown numbers. He ignored them all. At 10 a.m., a call came in from Margot. They're cracking. Darrell confessed to the shell companies, blamed everything on Cliff, said the CEO pressured him to keep the cash flow quiet in exchange for department funding. What about Kramer? He's playing dumb. Claims he didn't know about the laundering. Says he was just advising on strategy. Are they buying it? No one's buying anything today, Mark. The room's full of auditors, and we're ordering a full forensic sweep, she paused. The board wants to meet you. Mark exhaled slowly. He had expected this, but it still landed heavy. I'm not looking for reinstatement, he said. I know, Margot replied, but they want to talk about something else. That afternoon, in a quiet boardroom overlooking the Tucson skyline, Mark stood before 10 people who had once been strangers. Now, They saw him differently, not as the aging tech guy who kept the servers humming, but as the man who had saved them from scandal and collapse. The interim chair, a gray-haired man named Alan Rivera, cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, let me begin by saying what should have been said long ago. Thank you. You didn't owe us anything after the way things ended, but you came forward anyway, not for yourself, but for the integrity of the company." Mark didn't respond. He waited. "We'd like to offer you something," Alan continued. "Not a return to your old role. We're creating a new executive position, Chief Information Integrity Officer, independent authority, reports directly to the board." Mark arched an eyebrow. "Full autonomy?" he asked. Alan nodded. "Budgetary authority, access clearance across all departments, oversight of procurement, vendor validation, and internal audits. We want to build safeguards into our systems, and we want you to design them." Margot added, "You're the only one we trust to do it right." Mark didn't smile. He didn't say yes. Not yet. By evening, the news had broken. Sierra Tech execs under investigation for multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. CFO confesses. CEO under scrutiny. Consultant allegedly involved. Former employees report triggers emergency internal audit. Though Mark's name wasn't mentioned in the first wave of articles, insiders knew. His inbox filled with messages, former co-workers, industry contacts, 2 rival firms offering executive roles with generous signing bonuses. Even Rachel, his daughter, texted him a simple, "Dad, whatever you did, it's everywhere. Proud of you." He stared at that message longer than any other. Later that night, Lena sat across from him at their kitchen table. She reached over, took his hand. "You got them," she said softly. Mark looked out the window toward the horizon. The sun had long since set. "No," he replied, voice even. "I got the truth out. The rest is just gravity doing its job." And indeed, it was. The pyramid had collapsed, not because Mark had shouted, but because he had pulled the right brick at the quietest moment. Justice hadn't knocked. It had crept in through the server room wearing a flash drive. 3 weeks later, the world looked different. Mark Harrington stood at the window of his new corner office on the 22nd floor of Sierra Tech's headquarters. The room was quiet, not sterile, but purposeful. A single photo of Lena and Rachel rested on his desk. No trophies, no tech clutter, just clean lines and a clear view of Tucson's skyline. He had accepted the board's offer, not out of pride, but out of principle. His new title, Chief Information Integrity Officer. His mandate, independence, authority, and full visibility across all digital operations. His first action, overhaul the vendor vetting system and install continuous auditing AI protocols. The same kinds of protections he'd recommended years ago but had been told were not cost-effective. Now, no one argued. Across the building, Daryl Stanton had resigned in disgrace after pleading guilty to multiple fraud charges. He was awaiting sentencing. Cliff Morton had been placed on indefinite leave pending the results of a broader investigation. Eli Kramer, the so-called consultant, had fled the country but was already on a federal watch list after IRS involvement escalated the case. More than $4.5 million had been traced, frozen, and partially recovered. Enough to stabilize the company's public trust and avoid shareholder panic. Inside Sierra Tech, the tone had shifted. Mark no longer walked unnoticed through the IT department. Conversations quieted out of respect, not fear. His former colleagues greeted him with the kind of sincerity that couldn't be manufactured. One younger analyst, Benji, the same kid who once nervously asked him for help debugging a database loop, now ran infrastructure operations. Mark had promoted him last week. "Good eye," he'd told him. "Just don't let them forget why we do this." Mark wasn't rebuilding the old systems. He was re-engineering the culture. That Friday, Lena met him for lunch at a small cafe 2 blocks away. As they sat on the patio under a wide blue sky, she smiled at the ease that had returned to his face. "So," she said, stirring her tea, "does it feel like closure?" Mark thought for a long moment. The anger that had once simmered in him was gone. So was the grief. What remained wasn't revenge, it was resolution. "I don't think it's about closing," he finally said. "It's about correcting." She nodded. "And rebuilding?" He looked back at the high-rise behind them. "Exactly." That night, Mark logged into LinkedIn for the first time in months. He updated his title. Then he wrote a post, not for likes, not for attention, but for anyone else who'd ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside after years of loyalty. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never assume the quiet one isn't watching. Some bridges collapse under the weight of greed. Others? They're rebuilt stronger than ever because someone refused to walk away. By Monday, the post had over 12,000 shares, but Mark didn't care about the numbers. He cared that people were finally listening. And this time, they'd remember who made sure the system worked, not by tearing it down, but by repairing what was broken, brick by brick, with integrity. In a world that often glorifies speed, youth, and disruption, Mark Harrington's story is a reminder that wisdom, consistency, and quiet integrity still matter, perhaps now more than ever. After decades of loyalty, he was cast aside without warning, but instead of reacting with bitterness, he responded with precision, patience, and principle. His strength wasn't in revenge, it was in restoring what was right. For older adults who may feel invisible in today's fast-changing landscape, this story speaks deeply. Your experience is not outdated. Your values are not irrelevant. What you've built over years, trust, insight, resilience, has weight. And when systems break down, it's often the steady hands and calm minds of seasoned individuals who hold the key to rebuilding. The lesson? Never underestimate your quiet strength. In moments of crisis, it's not noise that changes outcomes, it's character. Mark didn't burn bridges. He let the faulty ones collapse and chose to rebuild, stronger than before. That is the quiet power of a life lived with purpose.